Okay, everybody have the papers for tonight, and if you're new and don't have a notebook, there are notebooks back on the coffee table, and what we do is every week we get a new study and just add it to the notebook. That's sort of our routine, all right? So let me start with the story, the psychology of unbelief. Did you hear about the man who went to the psychiatrist because he thought he was dead? And the psychiatrist tried to talk him out of thinking that he was dead, and he tried every trick he knew, and the guy still said, well, I'm dead. He was convinced. So finally, the psychiatrist had an idea. He said, tell me, sir, do dead people bleed? And the guy thought for a moment. He said, no, dead people don't bleed. And the psychiatrist said, well, good. He took a straight pin, pricked the guy's finger, and blood started dripping out of his finger. The psychiatrist triumphantly said, look, now what conclusion do you draw now? The guy said, well, for heaven's sake, dead people do bleed. I try not to tell a story unless I got a reason. The psychology of unbelief. It takes more than just evidence to bring us to faith or to unfaith. A lot of people pretend that's not true. If I just had the evidence, I'd believe. Of course I would. Not necessarily. Dead people do bleed. It's like our minds get so locked into what we think is true, evidence doesn't change anything. Are you with me? The psychology of unbelief. And we could say the psychology of belief. This is one of my favorite topics. Blaise Pascal. And I brought it just, I love this guy, Pascal. His statue is in downtown Paris in the Tower of Saint-Jacques, St. James. He's famous in France as a scientist. He did studies on air pressure, invented the first calculator in the 17th century. I don't know what a calculator was like in the 17th century. Was a genius. Died at age 39. But the French don't know what to do with his faith because he loved Jesus. And he had a night of fire that is really interesting. But this was this book is called Pensée. Anybody know the French word pensée? Thoughts. What does that mean? Thoughts. Very good, Danny Corbett. It's the French word for thought. And he was going to write what he hoped would be the definitive apologetic of the Christian faith. And whenever he would have a thought, pensée, he would write it on a slip of paper and put it somewhere in his apartment. And then he died at age 39. And he never wrote the book he wanted to write. But his friends found all these papers, as I understand it, around the house. And they said, well, let's just publish the pensée. Let's just publish his thoughts. And it's a classic of Western literature, the Pensée of Pascal's. It's not a novel. It doesn't read. There's no storyline. It's just different thoughts. Because what he was going to do was write a chapter on these thoughts when he had the time. But maybe his most famous thought, Blaise Pascal wrote about the relationship between the mind and the heart in these famous words. The heart has its... Anybody know this one? You don't know this. I'm introducing you to something new. The heart has its reasons, which reason knows not of. This is his most famous pensée, and I'm getting the privilege to introduce you to it. The heart has its reasons that the reason doesn't get. In other words, we think with our heart. The heart has its reasons. You're working on this. This is good. We arrive at an understanding of what is true not only by our heads, but by our hearts. That's why I started off with the silly story, for heaven's sake, dead people do bleed. That's not his head talking, that's his heart talking. But the reason we laugh is because we know we're all sort of like that. I thought of this when I was preparing the lesson. Just the facts, man. Were you a Dragnet fan? You remember Joe Friday? That's dating me. Or ma'am. Yeah, just the facts, ma'am. I actually, it was quoted both ways when I Googled it. Good for you. Just the facts, ma'am, may have worked for Joe Friday. He was the detective, and he was always, that was his famous line. I just want the facts, just the facts. But for everyone else, more than evidence is involved. It'd be nice to think that reason and facts would lead people to truth, but it doesn't. That's why this subject is so important. Think about how people take positions on a variety of issues. Now, this would be fun to just open it up for discussion. Santa Claus. Does Santa Claus exist? Evolution. Or I love this one, global warming. And why is it that global warming, which should be, or climate change, that's the new word, I think, an issue that should be pure science, I think, tends to be Democrats and Republicans. It's like, this shouldn't fall under politics. This ought to be a scientific question. But why is it political? Because the heart has its reasons. That reason knows not of. You think with your heart. Well, I know, but it's not the evidence. We may think it's the evidence, but or health insurance, any number of things. It would be fun to share stories of people that you know who believe things that just ain't so. But and hear the word believe, believe, believe. And I'm not excluding us. This is not aimed out at other idiots out there. This is aimed at idiots. It's talking to you tonight. Talking to you. Okay. Let me read you a couple of more. I just had fun today. Let me read you his 835th pensée. This is Pascal. This is a good book. This is one of the books you want to get to know before you die. Just get through it. You have to take it in small bites.
Wait a minute, honey.
We don't have much
We don't have much
time.
Wait a second.
Are you selling the book tonight?
No, I'm not. Just listen to this thought. There is enough evidence to condemn us, but not enough evidence to convince us. So that it should be apparent that those who follow it are prompted to do so by grace, not by reason, and those who evade it are prompted by concupiscence and not by reason. You follow what he's saying? That when you look at the data around you, there's going to be enough evidence to condemn us to hell at the judgment. When God says, why didn't you see? And every mouth will be shut. But there's not enough evidence to make it a conclusion. You've got to believe. It's like, who could put that balance of evidence there? God did. And that's one of his famous. Let me give you one other one. This is number 521. I picked this up this afternoon and I couldn't put it down. All right. Oh, this is a short one. Are you ready? It is not certain that everything is uncertain. That's good. You've got friends who think that everything is uncertain, and just ask them, are you certain about that? And because what you're doing is helping them to see the illogic of their position. That's one of the things apologetics does. Are you sure that everything is not sure? Because if you are, then you've just undermined your own philosophy. And if you're not sure, then you're just stuck in agnosticism. Nobody can know anything. Okay? Are you with me? So that's the introduction. The intellectual virtues, I've given you a footnote. James Sire writes about this. I'm going to do this real quickly, because what I want to do is turn to the Gospel of John. But those who study this And I like this. They say there are certain virtues of the intellect. If we are going to keep our head and heart in sync and be effective witnesses in a postmodern world, we must learn to practice the intellectual virtues, A, B, C, D, and D. Here's 4 of them, okay, real quickly. A passion for truth. A passion for truth. The truth is, many people are not interested in the truth. I got some nods on that one. That is a fact. But Christians are people who have a passion for truth, or should. And others too. It's an intellectual virtue. Rather, they are concerned about politics, or ideology, or lifestyles, or personal preferences. The primary question for most people is not, is it true, but do I like it? Not the same thing. Apologetics is interested in truth. Is it true? Did Jesus rise from the dead? Are the bones of Jesus rotting in some grave in Palestine? Paul said, if that's true, your faith is vain. Now that's a truth claim. It's verifiable. Jesus said, for this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Did any of you see the Truth Project that Focus on the Family did? That was the key verse. This is why I was born, to bear witness to the truth. Who did Jesus say that to? Pilate. Good. Pilate. And Pilate's answer was, yeah, right. What is truth? We're going to talk about that in a minute. Christians should be men and women who are ready to follow the evidence wherever it leads, because we love the truth. And Jesus said, I am the truth. And so whether it's scientific truth, whether it's historical truth, whether it's truth about origins, whether it's truth about DNA, whether it's psychological truth, sociology, if it's true, it's from God. And follow truth where it leads. That's a passion for truth. B, a passion for holiness. And this was in James Sire's book. This is not just in Stan Key's book or Francis Asbury Society's book. Holiness. What does holiness have to do with apologetics? I am so glad you asked. A pure heart is indispensable for clear thinking. I'm going to say that again. A pure heart and clear thinking go together. In biblical psychology, we think with our hearts, and herein lies the problem. Our hearts, as well as our minds, are corrupted by sin. In other words, when Adam and Eve fell in the garden, it wasn't just their heart and their body that fell, it was their thinking ability. It got messed up. We don't think right. I can still remember when that first dawned on me in the university. It was like, we don't think right? And let me listen to Romans 1. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness do what to the truth? Anybody know what it says? Suppress. Suppress the truth. You hear the word? It's not they don't have the truth. No, the truth is there. They have chosen, consciously or unconsciously. We have chosen. Let me say we have chosen to suppress the truth. Because what can be known about God is plain to them. God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. There's enough evidence to condemn us all. Are you with me? Often the problem in arriving at an understanding of the truth is not a lack of evidence, but the suppression of it. That can't be said strongly enough. Many reject God because they don't want Christianity to be true. One of the great purposes of redemption is to bring us to the place where we stop trying to make truth conform to our desires and start praying that our desires would conform to the truth. Big difference. Big difference. I stop looking for evidence to support what I already believe, and I start saying, Lord, maybe I don't believe right. Guide me in all truth. Big difference. And you can't do that unless you're humble and unless your heart is pure. C, a passion for consistency. We live in a universe. And Kaylin goes to a university or works at a university, not a multiversity. Have you ever thought about why is it called a university or a universe rather than a multiverse? Because you could easily look at the universe, you can look at nature and draw the conclusion there's nothing unified about it. Or maybe you could. But that's a Judeo-Christian view of reality. It's unified because there's one God, not many gods. It's a university. Thus, truth cannot be compartmentalized. What is true in one area of life will be true in all areas of life. All truth is God's truth, whether we are talking about Bible, science, history, origins, politics, or sexual ethics. Truth lovers seek consistency. So a passion for truth, a passion for holiness, a passion for consistency, and D, humility. I don't know if you've had this experience, but the smartest people I've ever known are the most humble people. And the people who think they're smart are usually the most arrogant people. Because smart people always know how much they don't know. Ask them. There's a line in C.S. Lewis somewhere that goes like this, and this just moved me when I first read it. Lewis wrote, I forget where he wrote it, but it was something like, people sometimes tell me that my writings have been meaningful and helpful to them. He says, that always surprises me, but if it's true that what I write has helped other people, it's only because, like a sick person who's been in the hospital for a very long time, I've learned my way around the corridors and the hallways, and I've just been there longer than other people, so I can show them the way around. That is a beautiful, humble statement from one of the brightest brains of the 20th century. He said, I've been fighting this disease. I'm old, and I have learned my way around the hallways, but you hear the humility in that, the beauty of it. One of the surest evidences that one is walking in the truth is that he or she is humble. You have to be wise to know how, you can take your pick, how dumb, how stupid, idiotic you really are. And that's really true. That's not just posturing. This is Paul. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. I'd like to suggest that we embroider those verses and hang them above our mantles. It's a great verse. John Stackhouse, and this is a book I bought just because of the title. It's in the footnote there. It's called Humble Apologetics. It's a great title for a book. Humble Apologetics. Stackhouse explains that Christians should be humble in at least 3 respects. These are some big words if you want to impress your friends. These are his words, but they really mean something that's very comprehensible. Epistemologically humble simply means we're humble in what we know. Just because I know God doesn't mean I know everything. Even Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 said, now I know in part. As Francis Schaeffer was quick to point out, he was an influence on me when I was growing up. I don't know if he's read much anymore. We can know something truly without knowing it exhaustively. That's a good distinction. That's good vocabulary. We can know it truly, but it doesn't mean we know it exhaustively. Rather than pretending to know all truth, we should humbly acknowledge that we know the one who does. Okay? Rhetorically humble. This is humble in how we speak. Avoid cockiness and an air of superiority that pretends the evidence is such that any idiot can see this. And I have heard people witness with that kind of an attitude. Why, any idiot. Even books with the title, and I'm a little hesitant to say this, titles like Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Josh McDowell. It's a great book. But that title is a little strong when you think about it. It demands. In other words, if you read this book and you have an IQ of 45 or 50, you'll obviously become a Christian. Because it demands a verdict. Maybe we need to be a little more humble. I'm not suggesting Josh McDowell's arrogant. I don't think that's true. But the title, it makes you pause and think about. Show respect for others. Respect their intelligence. Respect their moral integrity. Respect their spiritual interest. I think that means love your neighbor. You love your neighbor when you show respect for them and their beliefs, and you're going to assume the best about their moral integrity. I love this quote from D.T. Niles. He said, evangelism is one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. That's good. That's very, very good. And third, be spiritually humble. Humble about our own spiritual experience. Only the Holy Spirit can change the heart and transform the mind. Paul wanted those converted under his ministry to ground their faith not in human wisdom, but in the power of God. Okay, we could talk more about that. That would be fun, but I want to turn to John's Gospel because John, in fact, turn to chapter 20. I've got the verse here in your paper, but look at it in your Bible just so you're... Chapter 20, verse 30 and 31. If you've ever studied the Gospel of John, you know that faith is the noun, that the word, if my memory's right, the noun form faith occurs almost not at all in John. It's always a verb, believe, believe, believe. And I haven't counted the number of times, but it's a major theme in John. And in chapter 20, verse 30 and 31, he gives us the purpose that he wrote the book for, the purpose. Are you following? Now Jesus did many other what? Signs. Very important word in John. Signs. It may mean miracle. And what is a sign supposed to do? A sign points to something. It's not really about the thing itself, it's what it points to, like a sacrament. It's not about the wafer and the juice, it's what it points to. It's an outward sign of an inward grace. Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these signs are written. In other words, what he's just been writing 20 chapters about, so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life. in his name. In other words, John wrote this book not just to share some information about a really neat guy. He's trying to convince us. And he's arranged his signs, what he wrote about, in a way that he hopes it will make faith possible. That you'll read what he tells us, and then we'll make a commitment of faith. I believe. And when we believe, we have life. One could say that the Gospel of John is the first book on Christian apologetics ever written. The author's goal is to convince his readers of the truth so they will believe the gospel and experience abundant life. To accomplish this purpose, John set forth a select number of signs or miracles. And there's, depending on how you count them, but I've counted 9 here. It's more fun when you make the number 7, which you can do, but not worried about the number 7 at this point. These are the signs he gave us. At a wedding, he turned water to wine. He healed a nobleman's son from a distance, no less. From a distance. He healed a paralytic who had been at the pool of Bethesda for 38 years, who had no one to put him in the water. And Jesus said, well, do you want to get well? And he healed him. He fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. He walks on water. Pretty impressive. He healed a man born blind. And the Pharisees not only didn't believe that he had done the healing, they didn't believe the man had really been born blind. Talk about skepticism. And the man finally said, or they finally said, go ask his parents. Go ask his parents. Search the evidence. Because if you don't want to believe this, you're not going to believe it. But he really was born blind. Lazarus is raised from the dead. This was the biggie. Jesus waited 4 days when he heard Lazarus was sick. He said, this sickness is for the glory of God. And he showed up late, long enough that when Jesus said to Martha, roll away the stone, she said, Lord, he stinketh. It's too late. You could have healed him because we know you heal sick people, but now he's dead as a doornail. You can't do anything. And Jesus didn't say, if you see a miracle, you'll believe. He said to Martha, if you believe, you'll see a miracle. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is seeing believing or is believing seeing? And Martha said, I believe. And Lazarus walked out. Okay? Jesus' own resurrection. And then finally in the next chapter, chapter 21, the miraculous catch of fish. When Jesus shows up on the shore and says, fellas, have you caught anything? They said, nope, nothing's biting tonight. And Jesus said, throw your net on the other side. And Peter said, that's Jesus. I've been here before. And he jumped in the water. And okay, these signs are outward and visible. In other words, this is a history book. John is not writing a novel. He's not talking about spiritual experiences. He's telling a story that, at least you have the impression, if a guy with a camera had been there, this happened in time and space. These signs are outward and visible, not inward and mystical. For example, in Buddhism, history doesn't really matter in Buddhism. It's all inner in what you experience. It's sort of mystical. You close your eyes and you enter into nirvana kind of things. Well, how do I know that's true? And you sort of say, well, it's true for me. Well, good for you. It's true for you. That fits very good in the postmodern world, but that's not what John is writing. He said, go ask the blind man. Go interview him. And the angel at the tomb says, come and see. Where's the body? Look, there's the grave clothes. Check out the facts. It's an invitation to check, to verify it. They occurred in time and space. They are verifiable. The signs are. They are verifiable. The same data was available to all. But did everybody believe? No. So the question is, if these facts are as obvious and as strong as John says they are, why doesn't the whole world believe? And I think John says, I'm so glad you asked that question, because that's what we got to understand. It's not evidence that is ultimately going to convince people. There's more going on. Evidence is important. Pascal says it's reasonable to know the limits of reason. Reason will help you get to a point where you realize I need more than reason to get me to where I want to be. That's right. That's very reasonable. Reason never saved a soul. Never has, never will, and it can't. Reason can only help you realize I need more than reason. I believe. Okay? So, turn to John 12, and let me read you a story. We're at the letter B there. This may be the main thing to get tonight. I used to skip over this part, and now it's sort of become key to the whole Gospel of John. John 12:27. John 12:27. About 3 verses here. Let me introduce it this way. Have you ever tried to witness to somebody who said to you, well, if God would speak audibly to me, I'd believe? Well, this is a case, Exhibit A, when he does. All right? Jesus says, verse 27, now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose I've come to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven. Now imagine if you were in Jerusalem this afternoon when this happened. A voice from heaven. And I don't have enough of a baritone voice to read. We ought to let Daniel read it for us. I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. So you get the picture. Jesus is praying, Father, glorify your name. And a voice, loud voice, says, I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. Verse 29. The crowd that stood there and heard it said, what?
Thundering.
That's thunder. Others said, nah, it's an angel. And Jesus said, the voice has come for your sake, not mine. God just spoke to you in a way that is unavoidable to know that he spoke. But some of you took the naturalist position. Some of you took the superstitious position. It's an angel or it's thunder. Now is the judgment of this world. The voice is for your sake. Let me just read you what I wrote here. Numbers of unbelievers have said, if only God would speak in an audible voice, then I'd believe. Of course I'd believe. What do you think I am, stupid? I mean, if God would speak to me, I'd like to believe. If he just doesn't, he doesn't. Larry King said, what did Larry King once say? I think he said, what I'm going to say to God is, why didn't you give us more evidence? Or something like that. It's just like, I'd believe, but give us more evidence. I think it was Larry King, or something like that. But that's exactly what happened in this incident. John records it so we can understand that it takes more than evidence to produce belief. When God spoke from heaven, the crowd divided itself into 3 groups: the naturalists, the superstitious, and the true believers. Actually, in The Pursuit of God, A.W. Tozer talks about this miracle. And Want me to read it to you? I brought A.W. Tozer with me too. See if I can find it. The Pursuit of God. This is a chapter I hope you've read The Pursuit of God. This is one of the great classics of devotion. God's inner voice. We have trained our ears not to hear. And that takes training. Not to hear. It's just thunder. The speaking voice is a fact. How men reacted to it is for any observer to note. When God spoke out of heaven to our Lord, self-centered men who heard it explained it by natural causes, saying it thundered. Just like you look at the galaxies and say, time plus chance. That did it. It's the naturalist explanation. This habit of explaining the voice by appeals to natural law is at the very root of modern science. In the living, breathing cosmos, there is a mysterious something too wonderful, too awful for any mind to understand. The believing man does not claim to understand. He falls to his knees and whispers, God. The man of earth kneels also, but not to worship. He kneels to examine, to search, to find the cause and the how of things. Just now we happen to be living in a secular age. Our thought habits are those of the scientist, not those of the worshiper. We are more likely to explain than to adore. It thundered, we say, and we go on our earthly way. Isn't that good? That's A.W. Okay. Hey. Oh, Sammy Tippett is... Sorry. Sammy and Tex, welcome, welcome, welcome. I've been talking about you.
Well, sorry to disturb you.
No, we're glad to be disturbed. You want to stay and join us? Can we?
Want to come say hello?
Well, so glad you did. They just landed at a little before 6, but we're going to make them work. Good to see you. This is our Tuesday night Bible study. We are studying apologetics, and tonight we are studying the psychology of unbelief. I would love. So why do people not believe? Yeah. Good. Well,
It's good to meet
thank you
all.
for sticking
Good
in, sticking your
to be
head
here
in.
with you.
Yeah.
Look forward to this week.
Thank you. I'm so glad you came. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mike, for bringing them. We'll see you shortly. They're staying at our house, so we're going to go home and see you shortly.
Here or she? Oh, okay. They'll be there waiting for you.
The door's open, and the key's under the brick on the front porch.
Where is it?
It's where any thief would look. It's right there. That's so true. Hey, that's special. That's Sammy. That's good. Okay, we have 20 minutes, and we have 4 reasons for unbelief. I've set it up. You can look these on your own. I'm going to read 4 passages from John and give 4 psychological reasons, if we can say it that way, why people don't believe. Atheists and agnostics seem to delight in claiming that Christians are uneducated, gullible simpletons. I should have looked up recently. There was some just incredible comment about how dumb evangelical Christians are. You know, these kind of things get a lot of press. I just want to say that John's gospel helps us to understand the knife cuts both ways. And John is exposing the hypocrisy of unbelief and the psychology of unbelief. So it cuts both ways. Yes, there's a lot of dummies who are in the church. We don't have to pretend they're not. And there's a lot of people who believe based on who knows what reasons. But the knife cuts both ways. Unbelievers also have biases that undergird their own most basic assumptions, which are called beliefs. John explains there are 4 possible, and I think there could be more than 4, but there are 4 possible reasons that cause people not to believe in Jesus Christ. Okay? Turn to John 18. and let me read you the first one. I've already started it. This is Jesus before Pilate, one of the most dramatic moments in human history. Jesus is on trial and about to be executed, but you don't have to read very long in this trial when you realize Jesus is not the one on trial. Pilate is the one on trial, and he is exposed. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, verse 33 of chapter 18, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus said, "You say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I've come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who's of the truth listens to my voice." And Pilate said, now you need a dramatist to read this. All we've got here are the inspired words. We don't have the intonation. Did Pilate say, "Truth is what I've been looking for my whole life. What's truth? Can you help me?" Or did Pilate say, "Yeah, right, truth. Give me a break. What's truth?" Definitely the latter, in my humble opinion. Let me read a little bit. This is what I'm going to call a philosophical difficulty of faith. Pilate's problem was the same problem many postmoderns have: the philosophical concept of truth. What is truth? As a politician, and Pilate is the quintessential politician, it oozes out of his pores. If you let this man go, you're no friend of Caesar. I mean, it's all politics. It's not, the courtroom was not about truth. It wasn't about right and wrong. It was about politics. As a politician, his focus was on power, which means getting my own way. That's what power means. Not truth. He was a cynic. C-Y-N-I-C. Cynic. He wasn't really an atheist. He wasn't really an agnostic. He wasn't even a skeptic. He was a cynic, doubting the very existence of truth. Like many today, Pilate believed in relativism. In other words, there are no absolutes. And I just put some synonym type of words: multiculturalism, pluralism, political correctness. He was certain that everything was uncertain. In other words, this is a philosophical problem. What is truth? And if you don't believe there's a category called truth, then when someone says, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life," there's no philosophical way to sort of deal with that. Do you know the book, The Closing of the American Mind, 1987? This is a great book, and it's worth the price of the book for the first paragraph, which I'm about to read you. This is paragraph number 1. "There is one thing a professor can be absolutely certain of. Almost every student entering the university believes, or says he believes, that truth is relative. Some are religious, some are atheists. Some are to the left, some to the right. Some intend to be scientists, some humanists or professionals or businessmen. Some are poor, some rich. They are unified only in their relativism and their allegiance to equality. The danger they've been taught to fear from absolutism is not error, but intolerance. The true believer is the real danger. The study of history and of culture teaches that all the world was mad in the past. Men always thought they were right, and that led to wars, persecutions, slavery, xenophobia, racism, and chauvinism. The point is not to correct the mistakes and really be right. Rather, the point is to not think you're right at all. That's a wonderful paragraph, a scary paragraph. And that was written in 1987, and I think it's 10 times true today. The real danger is the believer. And tolerance can tolerate anything except someone who's intolerant. Again, that's a logical contradiction. Reaching people like Pilate typically demands a philosophical challenge to their most basic assumptions, relativism, like asking the question, are you certain everything is uncertain? You're challenging their philosophy when you ask them that. You're not even mentioning Jesus. You're just saying, you got a philosophy, like, try that in math class. Try that in math class. That any answer is equally valid. I dare you. You know, we know in math class it doesn't work. 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 22. Even if there's a logic to why you think it might. It's the wrong answer. There's only one narrow answer in math. Before such a person can believe that Jesus is the truth, he or she must discover the truth about truth. So this is the philosophical problem. Turn to chapter 20, and let me introduce you to another kind of problem. You know this story. This is Thomas, a.k.a. Doubting Thomas. All right? John chapter 20, beginning at verse 24. Now, Thomas is very different than Pilate, but he's struggling with faith. Now, Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. Wouldn't you have hated to miss Sunday morning service when Jesus showed up? Well, Thomas wasn't there. So the other disciples told him, "We've seen the Lord." But he said, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and to place my finger in the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." He didn't say, "I can't believe." He said, "I won't believe." What's the difference in can't and won't? That's a very interesting question. 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas said, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you've seen me?" Is seeing believing, or is believing seeing? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. Number 2, I'm going to call these intellectual difficulties. Pilate was a cynic. Thomas was a skeptic. And again, took me a long time before I learned the difference between a cynic and a skeptic. A cynic doesn't really believe in truth. Everything is relative. A skeptic says, no, there is truth and error. I'm not struggling with that. I need help believing. I need somebody to give me some reasons for the hope that is within them. That's how Peter put it. Thomas was a skeptic. His problem was not the concept of truth, but rather the need for evidence. He was open to faith, but he needed a reason to believe. He was an honest doubter. And that word honest is very important. There's a lot of doubters who are dishonest. They're using doubt as a smokescreen until he knew that believing in Jesus was plausible, a plausible intellectual option, he remained stuck in his doubts and skepticism. Many today, I'm still reading here, many today don't believe the gospel because the data they have is poor and they lack proper evidence. In other words, there are honest doubters. In fact, I think there's a lot of them. They really need help. And here's my worst case scenario exhibit. Richard Dawkins, in his book, The God Delusion, describes the God he doesn't believe in. Now, this is for the record books. This is a famous quote. This is the God Dawkins, an atheist, says, I don't believe in. God is, arguably, the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it. A petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak. A vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser. A homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. I have to practice reading that sentence at home. And I put a footnote at the bottom. Every Christian I've ever known would like the chance to say to Mr. Dawkins, I don't believe in that God either. What God are you rejecting? That's not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Who have you rejected? If your data's wrong, some people need help with data, with evidence. To reach honest doubters, we may first have to help them find honest answers for honest questions so that their intellectual obstacles can be overcome and faith becomes possible. Possible. And I've just started a list here. Add to my list. You'll meet people who will say, now if they're honest doubters, and one of the things you want to do in witnessing is try to discern, are you really, if these questions become plausibly answerable, are you ready to surrender to Jesus Christ? Or are you just enjoying the debate and living in your own preferences? But there are people who need answers to questions like, that will say things like, well, the Bible's just full of myths. I mean, that's what my teachers at the university told me. And how can you believe that stuff? It's like believing the Easter Bunny when you ask me to believe in God. Now, if that's an honest statement, because there's a lot of people that's what they've been taught. They need honest answers. Or, well, if I became a Christian, I would have to give up belief in science. It's like, what do you mean? The greatest scientists in history were Christians, but not everybody understands that. Or here's one. This is a big one. Well, what about the Crusades and the Inquisition and slavery? You want me to believe in something that supports slavery and practice the Inquisition? Now, if that's an honest question, you need to say, could we go to Starbucks and talk about that? Or let me give you some books to read that would at least help you with that. That's a great, thank you for your question. And or here's one. Why do Christians hate homosexuals? This is huge in our culture today. You're full of hate. What's the hate problem? And there are people who need real help with saying, well, it may look that way, but it's not hate. I don't believe in the Easter Bunny either. You believe in Jesus, and you want me to believe in the Easter Bunny. It's like, no, we're not talking about the same thing. What are some other questions that you've encountered? Don't answer. Let me keep moving. We got 2 more to go. I didn't do my time right, but that's okay. Let me tell you what they are.
Keep going.
Let's read John 11. Number 3 are emotional difficulties. This is a big one. Emotion. Something has happened in life, and I got a bum deal on something, and I just can't believe that there's a God who loves me. I'd like to, but my father abused me. My baby died. My mother was killed by a drunk driver. You want me to believe in God? Come on. That's not an intellectual problem. That's not a philosophical problem. I've been hurt, man. If there's a God who loves me, how can I believe? This is Welcome to Martha and Mary, where Martha says, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Where were you? You took 3 extra days to come, and my brother's dead. And Jesus said, if you believe, you will see. Not if you see, you'll believe, Martha. But if you believe, you'll see the glory of God. Your brother will rise again. Do you believe this, Martha? That's the question. And Martha says, I believe. Lazarus, come forth. That's the story. I've already told it to you. Sometimes a traumatic life experience makes it impossible to believe in a kind, loving Heavenly Father. I can't believe in a God who would let my baby die, who permitted my father to sexually abuse me, who didn't protect me from bankruptcy. Do you know C.S. Lewis's story? So powerful. Read Surprised by Joy. It's powerful. When he was a child, his mother was sick. He was 6, I think. He prayed and prayed and prayed. God, don't let my mommy die. Don't let my mom. And she died. And C.S. Lewis became an agnostic. Crystal clear logic. My mother's sick. I pray. I ask God to heal her. He doesn't. God can't exist. Or if he does, we can't know it. That's not an intellectual reason. It's a life experience reason. Here's a very interesting. So, William J. Murray explains the atheism of his mother, Madeline Murray O'Hare. Now, she's the gal who chased prayer out of public school. She's probably the most famous atheist of the 20th century, at least in America. William Murray, who later became a Christian, explained his mother's atheism this way. This was a great paragraph. It is my opinion that my mother's maniacal campaign to remove all reference to God in public schools and government, plus her heated atheistic campaigns over the years, stem back to this issue. She was mad at men. And she was mad at God, who's male. Rather than confront her conscience, she determined to deny God's existence. At least Strobel quoted her on that. That's a pretty insightful statement. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Martha is a hero because she chose to believe in Jesus even when life was falling apart. Did I not tell you, if you believe, you would see the glory of God? Most people assume that seeing is believing. Martha helps us to understand the deeper truth that believing is seeing. Reaching people struggling with emotional hindrances to faith often demands that we weep with them. Jesus wept. That's at Lazarus' tomb. Pointing them to the cross of Jesus Christ where he too experienced evil. My God, why? So are you following me? Why don't people believe? Some have philosophical difficulties. What is truth? Some have intellectual difficulties. They need more data, evidence. Some have emotional difficulties. They've been hurt. Lord, where were you? And number 4, and with this we're done, moral difficulties. Moral difficulties. Let me just read you a few places. John 3, verse 19. It's unbelievable how clear the Bible speaks on this stuff. John 3, of course, John 3:16, we know God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. A few verses later, beginning at verse 19. And this is the judgment, that light has come into the world. Now, if the world is dark and light comes into darkness, how can you miss the light of the world? How can you miss the light of the world? This is how. Light has come into the darkness, But people loved darkness rather than light because their works were evil. How many sins are committed at night? My mother used to tell me when I was in high school, nothing good happens after 11 o'clock.
Actually, it's probably no more than the daytime.
But there's a reason it's dark. It's profound. People love darkness rather than light. Why? Because their deeds are evil. Because everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God. Let me just leave it with there. Let me read you the paragraph here. If Jesus is Lord, our lives have to change. And let me tell you, nearly every sinner understands this intuitively. If I put my faith in Jesus, some things are going to have to change in my life. Yes, that is exactly right. You can't say Jesus is Lord and live the way you've always lived. This means the one to whom we are witnessing will have to stop sleeping with his girlfriend, cheating on exams, drinking so much alcohol, and watching pornography. And I just wrote, no wonder atheism is so attractive. It goes together. Listen to Dietrich Bonhoeffer. The man who disobeys cannot believe, because only he who obeys can believe. Again, the chicken and the egg. Do you believe so you can obey, or do you obey because so you'll believe? And Bonhoeffer nails it. If you're living in disobedience, faith is impossible. Atheistic philosopher Thomas Nagel at least was honest enough to admit the truth. Listen to what he said. I want atheism to be true. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there's no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. It's like, thank you for being honest. I like this guy. I really like this guy. I'd love to talk to him because I think he's talking truth. I understand that. Those living in willful disobedience to the will of God, in other words, those who love darkness, must be made to see that until they surrender their will to God, faith will be impossible. Their problem is not intellectual. They'll be telling you, well, I need more evidence, or if God would just speak to me, or if God would just reveal himself. You need to gently find a way to say, my last sentence there, they are guilty of treason against the Most High King. You're living in disobedience. Faith is impossible. All right? Steps to faith, and we're done. For the honest seeker who longs to conquer the doubts that ravage his or her soul. A, doubt your doubts. Doubt your doubts. Help that skeptic that you're witnessing to. Don't be so sure everything is uncertain. Doubt your doubts. Find a chink in their armor. B, surrender your will. John 7:17 may be the most important verse in the whole book of John on this. If anyone's will is to do God's will, he will know whether the teaching is from God or not. Is your will to do God's will? If it's not, you'll live in your agnosticism and skepticism and atheism forever. C, receive Jesus. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. And D, allow God to give you the gift of faith. Faith is a gift. For by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not your own doing. It is the gift of God. Okay, let me tell you one quick story. It's a Katie story. I didn't ask her permission, but I hope it's okay.
You're in trouble.
Katie and I had been dating about 2 years, and we were in love, and I was in seminary, and I was sitting in it's now the administration building up on the top floor on my bed, and I was asking myself the question, how do I know if she is the one? You ever had that question? How do I know? And it was like the answer came. You know by faith. Listen to my question. How do I know that she's the one? And the answer that I got was, you know by faith. And I sort of said to God, you mean it's not that I know she's the one, it's I believe she's the one. God said, that's right. And I said, I can say that. And I went out and bought a diamond. I don't know if that connects to you, but think of the question, how do I know she's the one? How do you know Jesus is the Christ? You know by faith. That's how knowledge works. You believe. It's not, I know him, I believe him. And knowledge comes out of that. They go together. Lord, thank you tonight. Thank you for the wonderful book of John and how it speaks not just to faith, but to the lack of faith and helps us to understand unbelief. And it's easy to talk about the unbelief in people out there. But Lord, maybe the more important question is the unbelief that so often can find its residence in our own hearts. Would you give us that gift of faith? Would you help us to doubt our doubts? Would you help us to receive Jesus into our hearts so that we can believe? Lord, thank you for these simple reminders of how fundamental faith is and the foundation on which it rests. Continue to speak to us through your word and through your spirit. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Sorry I was too long, but we covered it.